Jiwon's feet ached as she shuffled into the practice room, her heart heavy with the weight of yet another long day. She had barely slept the night before, spending hours going over choreography and vocal runs, hoping that tomorrow would be better. But here she was again, struggling to fit into a world that felt too fast, too bright, and just too hard. She was a trainee at Dreamstar Entertainment, one of the biggest K-pop agencies in Korea. But unlike the others in her group, Jiwon didn't have that certain spark. She wasn't the best dancer, her voice cracked on high notes, and her acting skills were, frankly, still a work in progress. She wasn't an instant star like the others, and every day she felt the sting of being reminded of it. "Jiwon, again," the voice of her instructor, Mr. Lee, barked from across the room. "You're messing up the most basic steps. You're holding everyone back. If you can't keep up with the rest of them, you'll be out of this group before you know it." Her stomach churned with shame, but she nodded silently, forcing a smile to mask her frustration. She had heard this before. It was the same every day. She wasn't the best, but she kept pushing herself, knowing that if she could just keep going, if she could just push through this, one day she might finally be good enough. But as the other trainees shot her dismissive glances, she wondered how much longer she could keep up the act. The training room buzzed with energy as the other trainees chatted and laughed while wiping down their faces and stretching. Jiwon remained silent in the corner, sipping from her water bottle, trying to blend into the shadows. The constant comparison, the snide remarks, and the whispers when she wasn't looking made her feel like an outsider. She was the girl who would never make it, the girl no one expected to rise to the top. "Hey, Jiwon!" one of the older trainees, Soyeon, called out to her as she was heading for the door. "Don't take it personally. Some people just don't have the talent for this. You might want to think about your future." Jiwon's heart sank. Soyeon's words weren't said out of kindness. They were just the truth, as the older trainee saw it. And deep down, Jiwon knew she was right. Maybe this was all a waste of time. Maybe she should just leave before it got any worse. She wasn't like the other girls. She wasn't talented enough, pretty enough, or confident enough to stand out in a world where those qualities were everything. But she refused to let herself leave. Not yet. Not when she had worked so hard to get here. She had a dream, one she'd had ever since she was a little girl, becoming a K-pop idol, singing and dancing for the world to see. That dream had driven her to leave her small hometown and come to Seoul, far away from the life she'd known. She couldn't just let it slip away now, no matter how hard the road ahead seemed. The next day, things were no different. Practice began at dawn, and Jiwon pushed herself through the routine, determined to show the instructors she wasn't just wasting space. But the harsh criticisms kept coming. Every mistake felt like a blow to her spirit. Her legs trembled from fatigue, and she could barely keep her eyes open. By the time the practice was over, her mind felt foggy, and her body ached. As she slumped against the wall, clutching her sore knees, she overheard a conversation between two of the other trainees, Mi Yeon and Hana. "Did you hear? The CEO is coming today," Mi Yeon said in a low voice, clearly excited. "They're supposed to select a few trainees for the next big project, and it's going to be huge." "Really?" Hana replied, voice full of disbelief. "The CEO is always so busy. I've never seen him come here before. I heard he's personally going to observe the new batch of trainees. They're selecting potential members for their new girl group, and if you get picked, your life is basically set," Miyeon continued, her voice tinged with envy. Jiwon felt a sudden pang of fear. The CEO? He was the one who owned Dreamstar Entertainment, the man behind the massive company. She'd never had the privilege of meeting him, nor had anyone in the company made any attempt to explain anything about him to her. All she knew was that his name was an enigma, and his presence was something that seemed beyond her reach. The idea of the CEO seeing her, with her imperfections, filled her with dread. But then in the back of her mind, a quiet voice spoke. What if this was her chance? What if this could be her moment? Could she somehow impress him? Could she prove to him that she belonged here? The day of the CEO's visit arrived faster than Jiwon expected. There was an air of nervous excitement in the building as the trainees got ready for their routines. Ji-won felt like she was walking through a fog. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of worry and uncertainty. Ji-won, you look like you're about to faint, So-jin, one of the few trainees who had been kind to her, said as they were getting ready backstage. Don't stress. Just do your best like you always do. Ji-won forced a smile, but the weight of the situation was heavy on her shoulders. She was about to perform in front of the most powerful man in the company, someone whose opinion could shape her future forever. The practice began, and Ji-won pushed herself through the motions, trying to focus on the steps, the beats, the rhythm. She had never felt so nervous in her life. Her hands shook as she held the microphone, and her legs wobbled as she danced. Every note she sang seemed off-key. Every step she took was too slow or too fast. Ji-won! Mr. Lee's voice cracked through the tension in the room. Get it together! Her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She couldn't look up. She couldn't make eye contact with the CEO, sitting in the front row, his expression unreadable. All she could do was finish the routine and pray she hadn't made a complete fool of herself. When the practice finally ended, Ji-won rushed to the back, feeling like her heart was going to burst. She could hear the murmur of voices and whispers as the other trainees buzzed with excitement. Seo-jin smiled reassuringly at her, but Ji-won couldn't bring herself to return it. Then, out of nowhere, a voice called her name. Ji-won. She froze. It wasn't Mr. Lee. It wasn't Seo-jin. It was a voice that came from behind her, low and commanding, but also familiar. She turned around and saw a man standing in front of her, tall, dressed in a sleek suit, with an air of authority that instantly made her stomach drop. You were the one who was dancing earlier, weren't you? The man's gaze was intense, but there was something in his eyes that softened as he studied her. I must admit, I was impressed by your perseverance. Not everyone can handle the pressure. Ji-won blinked in surprise. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't do well. The man's lips quirked into a small smile. I beg to differ. You're one of the few who didn't give up halfway through. You've got something others don't. Grit. I admire that. Ji-won didn't know what to say. She was still in shock. This was the CEO? This was the man who owned the company? Who controlled everything she had worked for? I'm sorry, but who are you? She finally managed to ask, her voice shaky. The man's smile widened, but there was something else behind it, something familiar. My name is Kim Hoon. I'm the CEO of Dreamstar Entertainment, he said simply, before his eyes narrowed as though appraising her. And I think we need to talk. Ji-won stood frozen, her breath shallow as the words of the CEO, her father, echoed in her mind. The room around her seemed to blur, and for a moment she felt like she was caught in a dream. She had heard him clearly, but the truth he revealed was so far from what she had imagined that it felt like a lie, something too surreal to believe. You're my father? Her voice was barely above a whisper, trembling with disbelief. But I've been here for so long and you never told me. Why now? Why after everything? Kim Hoon, Dreamstar Entertainment's powerful CEO, leaned forward slightly, his expression both gentle and full of regret. There was something about the way he looked at her now that made Ji-won's heart ache. He wasn't just the cold businessman she had imagined. He was a man with history, with a past. Her past. I know this must be overwhelming, he said quietly, his voice low but steady. But there are things in life that aren't as simple as they seem. I couldn't tell you the truth before, Ji-won. Not until I was sure it was the right time. The circumstances were complicated. He paused as though gathering his thoughts. But now, watching you here, seeing how far you've come on your own, it's time you knew the truth. Ji-won felt the weight of his words pressing down on her. Her head was spinning, and she had so many questions. Why didn't he come for her sooner? Why keep this secret? But I've been so alone in all of this, Ji-won murmured, more to herself than to him. Fighting every day, struggling, failing over and over. And I had no idea I had someone like you in my corner all this time. Kim Hoon's eyes softened. I wanted to be there for you, more than you know, but I didn't want to burden you with the weight of my name, my position, or my company. I thought that if you could grow up without that pressure, you'd have a chance to build your own life, on your own terms. Ji-won shook her head slowly. But I've been so lost, she said, her voice cracking. I've worked so hard to prove myself, to show everyone that I'm not just here because of who I am or where I come from. But it's been so hard, Dad. The criticism, the failure, the constant feeling that no matter what I do, it's never enough. Kim Hoon reached across the table, his large hand gently covering hers. I know it's been hard, Ji-won, but what you've done already, what you've accomplished on your own, is nothing short of remarkable. You don't need to prove anything to anyone, least of all me. For the first time in ages, Ji-won felt a tear slip down her cheek. It wasn't one of sadness, though. It was the weight of all the years of struggle, the years of pushing herself without any acknowledgement or support. It was the realization that she hadn't been as alone as she thought. Her father had always been there, watching, believing in her in a way no one else had. Kim Hoon stood and walked over to the window, gazing out at the city. His silhouette against the fading light was one of contemplation, and for a moment, he seemed lost in thought. Ji-won sat still, trying to absorb the shock of it all. She had spent her life trying to be independent, trying to prove that she wasn't just another girl from a rich family, she wasn't just the CEO's daughter. And now, here she was, facing the man who had always been there but had remained hidden in the shadows. You've been fighting so hard, Ji-won, Kim Hoon said after a long pause. And I admire that. But now that you know the truth, I want you to understand something. This industry is brutal. It's cutthroat. But it doesn't have to be a battle you face alone. Ji-won looked up at him, her eyes still red from the tears, but there was a new glimmer of hope in them. I don't know what to do now, she admitted softly. I feel like everything I've worked for has been a lie. No, Kim Hoon said firmly, turning to her with an earnest expression. You didn't get here because of me, Ji-won. You got here because of your own grit. You've shown everyone what you're made of. I'm not here to change that. I'm here to help you, to be the support that you need when things get tough. She swallowed, the realization sinking in that her entire life, her career, her struggle, was not for nothing. She had been enough all along. And now, she wasn't alone anymore. I want you to promise me something, Kim Hoon continued. Don't let anyone tell you that you're not good enough. Don't let the pressure of this industry or the way others see you ever make you doubt yourself again. You belong here because of who you are, not because of me. And you will make it on your own terms. Ji-won wiped her eyes, feeling a rush of gratitude. This was her chance, her real chance. For the first time, she wasn't just fighting to survive. She was fighting to thrive. I promise, she whispered, her voice steadying. I won't give up. Kim Hoon smiled at her, the warmth in his eyes undeniable. Good. Now let's take this one step at a time. If you ever need anything, you don't have to go through it alone.